Hello everybody. Welcome to another one of these Light and Land live stream evenings. And what's better than one guest? I hear you will shout, two guests. I'm joined today by Ed Rumble and Tom Sullam. So firstly, let me say a name, otherwise you'll both reply at once. Tom, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, and quite thrilled to be on my first live YouTube stream, actually.
There you go. What could go wrong? Kids running in, also, like BBC presenter, anything could happen. No, it's
The
great to
doors are
have you.
firmly locked.
It's great to have you along. And Ed Rumble. Ed, how are you, sir?
Yeah, evening, Sam. Evening, everybody. Very honoured and pleased to be here, and looking forward to being turned into a social media sensation.
Well, we can but try. It's very good to have you both along. Ed, you're rocking a Canon printer. It looks like an absolute mammoth thing behind you there. Fantastic. Maybe you could just live print something for us while we're at it.
Well, yeah, it might be a bit noisy.
Bit noisy, yes, that's fair, isn't it? He's frozen at the very thought of it. Well, thank you everyone who's watching along. As ever, if you are watching us live and you're on Facebook or YouTube, if you let us know in the comments where you're watching us from, that's always fun, and we can share that with the rest of the gang. We've got people coming in from all over the place. David's with us again in Germany. David, owner of the Taunus Photo Gallery, an excellent gallery over there in Bad Homburg. Sue is with us down in Devon, and Jez from Lower Dorset. Jez, as you know, I'm also Lower Dorseter. Lower purely in geography, not in quality, everyone. Tony's with us in Warwickshire. And, Astrid's with us in Surrey. Best behaviour, everyone.
The boss is in.
And Paul from Dublin. And if anyone can beat those, come on, everyone. Let's get those South Africas and New Zealands in. Let us know, because we're going to take you tonight on a trip around the world with Ed and Tom across their images, of course, like normal. And we're going to just do, before we dive into all sorts of locations and whatnot, hello everyone who's joining on, we're going to talk a little bit about Ed and Tom and their photographic background, as it were. Both of them very experienced photographers and have done a wide variety of things in the photographic world. And before they came to Light and Land, they both had some experiences leading tours and going on lots of tours. And I know Tom, for example, has done lots of things in America with Charlie and so on and so forth. So before we dived into the locations, though, we did want to talk to you a little bit about their photography, like I say, and some of their reasons why they love the landscape stuff as well. Like usual, and then we're going to dive into it in just a second, like usual, if you have any questions about the imagery, about any technical things, about Ed's printer, or indeed his wallpaper, just let us know in the comments, and I will put those questions to the chaps. And I think it's going to be good fun, because we'll have a bit of fun tonight with these two. So, guys, let's just get into it. And what we're going to do is we're going to share one each of your images from your sort of back catalogue, as it were, and we're just going to talk a little bit about how you came to be involved in the landscape photography world in particular. I know maybe Tom and Ed, we might touch on a couple of other bits around that. But Ed, if I can start with you, because this is one of your images, maybe if you can just fill us in a little bit from that point of view.
Yeah, happy to do so, Sam. Thanks. So this is a sort of bit of a light bulb moment for me, I guess. I mean, before getting into landscape photography, I worked when I was a student at a local photographic business, selling cameras, demonstrating cameras to customers, and the guy had his own studio on site, so we used to do portrait work, weddings, etc. And it came to the realization that that's not what I wanted to do photographically in life. Too much pressure.
Oh, he's buffering. He's buffering. It's the pressure.
Trees, frankly, and attractive scenes. So this is one of the sort of light bulb. This was taken on a Light and Land tour, actually. Gosh, over 20 years ago, probably 22, 23 years ago. And I suppose it was kind of quite early in my exploration of landscape photography, but it was one of the kind of epiphanies that one sometimes has with images, and where it all came together compositionally for me. And I kind of worked out really how I wanted to work with shape and form and flow and energy in landscape work. And it's quite a complex picture texturally, but graphically, I think it hangs on one or two specific motifs. The sort of the spheres of the trees on either side of the image, the central triangle, which is a shape that's echoed elsewhere in the image with the intersection of the dry stone walls, etc. And so those kind of graphic hooks became something that got my photographic antenna buzzing, really. And I suppose that that informed a lot of my subsequent work, where I was kind of looking for these strong graphic elements and compositional devices that you could build a photograph around. And so that this is where it started to all come together.
Yeah.
And
sorry, go on, Ed. Sorry to jump
I was just going to say, I mean, anecdotally, I remember after the trip showing this picture to Charlie. He was very kind about it, and but he said, I bet you were relieved that you were able to show the full extent of the tree trunk of the central tree. To which I said, of course, absolutely, Charlie, that was very important for me, lying through my teeth. But of course, what that demonstrated was how tiny little details in photographs can make the most enormous difference. I mean, if that bush had masked that tree, it would have lost all its authority, I think, and that kind of shape would have slightly fallen apart. And I think what I learned from that was, as landscape photographers, we do sweat the small stuff. It's really important to do that. Every little detail matters. If you're going to include it in your image, it is by definition important. And so, it's really important not to cut things in half or to mask things with other forms or elements in the photograph. And that kind of information, that wisdom, I've tried to carry forward with me, throughout the rest of my landscape career. And obviously now I enjoy working with, the light and land groups that we take away with us on those sorts of elements.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've got a good number of images tonight where we can see some of that graphical, those building blocks, as it were, and those elements that bring together that strong composition. So it's great. We'll be able to talk about that across a variety of things and in a variety of locations. So just if we move over to you, Tom, similar vibes. Maybe can you tell us what it is about this particular image that sort of meant something to you from your landscape pursuits anyway?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was lucky enough, I jacked in a career in the city to try something different, and I wasn't quite sure what. And Charlie had suggested to me to do photography. I'd always been into photography, but he said, make it a bit more official and maybe do a course, which I did for a year. And during that year, Charlie invited me to drive for him in Scotland, which was any excuse to spend time with him was jumped on. And so we went to Scotland and drove for a few days up the Western Highlands. This is not in the Western Highlands, but I'm just giving you the background. And we talked a lot about the techniques and so on. And I remember just thinking, I don't quite know what I like in photography. And I'm a bit panicked by landscapes because every time you tell me to stop the car, you're getting out, I'm looking around, I can't really see what the picture is. Then you tell me to have a look through your ground glass screen on your Hasselblad. And I look through and, Charlie's framed this beautiful image and I'm going, well, I did not even see that. And I'm staring at it. And then you put it on your camera and then it became an image. And rather than give me confidence, it made me think, I just can't see anything. So clearly I'm one of those guys that just can't see. So I'll always just be a driver. Now and again, I'll get to, load the boot. And then 1 year on, fast forward, Charlie invites me I'd now learned the techniques of photography, and he invited me to run a workshop in the US with him as obviously the leader. And before we met the group, we drove around, and this is Astoria, which is Astoria Bridge, which is in the town of Astoria, which anyone who's seen the Goonies, it's the opening scene in the Goonies. It's filmed in Astoria. And we were driving around and we stopped for a coffee somewhere, and I was looking out and I saw this. And in my mind, it was the first time I actually thought that's an image, and it included everything there, included the broken old posts, which is where the houses used to be built. It included the bridge, the light. I knew that a 10 stop would probably do the trick. It was just that, I think it was just that the first time, like, Ed has said, the light bulb moment, it was just that. And it's always given me the confidence to look back at this picture and go, sometimes you can't see stuff. Sometimes you go somewhere and you just aren't sure what to photograph. And that applies to everyone. It applies to the best photographers and the new photographers. And you kind of can work through it. It's not the end. You know that you're going to see something. You've just got to kind of work your way through it. Charlie, to kind of give me more confidence, Charlie also saw this independently from me. So we both have a virtually identical image because we both started doing it. But it was the first time that I'd seen something without having to look at his camera first. And certainly being able to look through his camera at the images must have taught me some things over that previous time in Scotland. But that was it. This was the first one that I could genuinely feel proud about. And I still like this picture. It's not, I don't do 10 stops so much anymore, but it certainly reminds me, and I use this sort of long tail with clients who are standing on the beaches going, I don't know what I'm looking at, which it happens a lot. People say, I don't know what to see. Tell me what I should be looking at. And slowly you can work through things and you will find something.
Yeah, and I think that leads us nicely actually to our next couple of images, because there are many ways to skin the cat or to interpret what we are seeing in front of us as well. And you guys have shared with me a couple of images, where you guys have been together out shooting, and yet you've seen something very different, or your interpretation of it is quite different as well. So I'm just going to sort of toggle between the two images here, because as the guys have alluded to, they both have been doing photography a good number of years, but I know, or I believe I'm right in saying, you guys have actually met on workshops before as well, obviously with the Charlie connection to a little bit. So in this instance, you were, excuse me, I keep flicking to that one, it wants to get in, doesn't it? In this instance, you wanted to obviously just see, you wanted to represent it two different ways. Were you working independently of each other? Were you on the beach at exactly the same time? What was the background? Ed, maybe give us a little bit of that.
Well, this is actually all Tom's fault. I mean, we arrived at the beach. I mean, we should have sacked him as a driver before this image was taken, because we were late getting to this location and there was no light left. And so, we were all disgusted with Tom at this point for mucking things up for us. And I found this composition by the shore, and Tom saw it immediately as well. But we, like you say, Sam, we set it up in a very different way. And my saving grace was I happened to have at the time, I was still film based at the time. This again was California, Big Sur. We were there together on a trip with Charlie. And I had a roll of something called Fujichrome Fortia, which is a very weird and wonderful film, which wasn't produced for very long. Legend has it was actually a batch of Fuji Velvia that went horribly wrong. Somebody put the wrong chemicals in the wrong machine at the wrong time. And out popped this Velvia on steroids, if Velvia needed any more steroids to pump it up. And so because we got there quite late and there was, very little color that I could perceive in the image, I thought I'd have a crack at it. This is super saturated film, let's have a go. And I still worked at the composition pretty hard. I mean, there's obviously the separation between the three rocks there, and I was quite careful to position them against the breaking wave. So you've got the black against the white. And then there's this lovely kind of curve of the receding wave in the sand in the foreground, which I really enjoy about this image. And when I got it back on the light box, I was amazed. I mean, there was color there, and the film had picked it up, but my eyes hadn't. And it really that lovely kind of sort of mauve color palette really rescued the image, and it was all thanks to this being amped up by this sort of slightly weird and wonderful film. But it worked a treat, and again, it's sort of, I suppose, this particular image speaks to my style that I touched on earlier, which is simplicity, graphic form, sort of careful arrangement of parts within the image, and I suppose what you might term a bit more of a sort of painterly style. I don't do sort of much kind of hugely saturated sunsets and sunrises, etc. I quite like the sort of more subdued, subtle color palettes and tones, and this is why this particular image works for me, despite Tom's best efforts to muck it up.
Yeah, getting you there late. And if we flip to you, Tom, obviously you'd taken the barrage of abuse from Ed digging you about the timings or whatever it might have been, but obviously you've approached this in a slightly different way. So I don't necessarily want to get into a kind of full breakdown, as it were, but just this idea that there are so many ways to interpret things, that when we go to certain locations, even if you're there with a small group or whatever it might be, I always find, and I'm sure you do too, it's so interesting to see what people have come back with at the end of that session, because there are always a multitude of things to do, aren't there, Tom, in terms of how someone might interpret something.
Yeah, and I think that's actually Ed and I have often spoken about exactly that. It's just the amazing thing of seeing people's images. And in fact, this is a classic example. We were both there. I wasn't late, by the way. It was Ed that was running up and down the beach looking for the best place to dig more sandcastles. So we had to flatten the sand out. Again, it took ages. He was the embarrassment. Once we got past that, there were a few of us, and I think I haven't actually seen the other pictures from the other 5 or 6 people on the group, but there's no doubt whatsoever that there'll be 6 or 7 different images. And I think, there's something that Ed and I do after our workshops is to have a sort of Zoom call, probably 4 to 5 to 6 weeks after the actual course is over. Really, because we hate this concept of saying goodbye in the car park on the last day and then everyone's gone, and you spend these intense days, dawn to dusk, with people that you don't know in the first minute, but by the last minute, you know a lot of things about each other. And to see people's images 6 weeks later, when everyone's had a chance to kind of go through them, crop them, edit them, whatever it might be, is a real kind of joy for us and a bonus for everyone, in that you just think, well, that's the only way this picture can be taken, because nothing else really works. And you see the next picture and you go, blast, I didn't see that. And so it's really kind of, it's the best way, I find. It goes back to what I was saying about being with Charlie and looking through his camera. You suddenly see how other people see, which just gives, it kind of ticks the next bit that you've learned about, which is that could also be an image. And so it's, we always say to people, walk around, don't just put your tripod out. When you get out of the van, dump your tripods and take pictures. Everyone still does it. We still do it. But actually, the walking around and looking at things, just like these 2 images, there's subtle differences. Okay, the black and white and the colors are a bigger one, but I chose 2 rocks. Ed chose 3, and I chose the water going over the rocks, and Ed was waiting for less of a big kind of creamy effect. So I think it's fantastic from a teaching point of view and from a learning point of view to see how people see, and also that you're not right. It's not like there's a right and a wrong. That's the beauty of this creation.
Yeah,
and it's a great way of stealing other people's ideas that come on the course and end up with better images than you do. So we obviously sneak back. We sneak back and replicate.
Like oiling your way up the ladder. Well, I think it's really interesting because as we're going to get into some of the locations, obviously we wanted to give you this kind of background and kind of introduce you a bit to Ed and Tom, because although they're reasonably new for Light and Land, they've been doing stuff for the last couple of years, and they've got plenty more stuff coming up. That they do work together, and I think it's really nice to have a team or a duo. Obviously, lots of Light and Land people, if they're watching, they will have known Phil and Clive, maybe from years gone by. And I'm not saying you are the Phil and Clive going forward, but I do just think when you're out on a tour as a client or as a guest, whatever you want to say, with 2 people, you get access to this 2 different ways of seeing, like we've just alluded to here in these images as well. Plus, obviously, lots of pretty dodgy repartee from the guys as well, but we'll come to that later.
That's actually free of charge.
It is. Which is about what it's worth.
Yeah, but actually, you make a really good point, because I also think when you're working with a group, there's invariably people who have got different interests, or they're at perhaps different stages of development with their photography, and having 2 people where you can kind of work independently with a little subset of the group who are perhaps interested in exploring long exposure techniques, but not everyone else is. It allows you to tailor a little bit more and customize the input and the teaching in that way, and I think it's a really useful way of working.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're going to talk about the Dolomites in a moment. Just before we do, Daryl says sometimes what's behind you is more interesting than what's in front of you, and that's absolutely right, isn't it? And actually, there's no better place for that in some ways than the Dolomites, because when you're in those mountainous regions, the sun is coming, going, the rain's coming, going, you've got peaks all around you. So I know we've got we've got a good number of images from here, so maybe I toggle through a few as we chat, but I know you guys went on and you ran a tour there last year, and I know that's something that we do in the summer. is the Dolomites one, and that comes around in June, because I think that's a really nice time, and we might talk about that as well, because yes, any time of year is kind of good there, but I think June is a particularly nice time for various reasons. But maybe, Tom, just from your point of view, as we look over the next couple of images, what is it about the Dolomites in particular, that you find, I mean, it's kind of an obvious question, especially with these images, but that you find, inspirational from a photographic point of view?
Well, I'd never been to the Dolomites before, so for me, it was a revelation. So I can go by my kind of immediate instinct and reaction to what we were seeing, and it was, I mean, it was godlike. This picture, this is Ed's image, and we had this incredible moment here on this mountain, Lagazoy, and I think this probably encapsulates the Dolomites better than any of the other images in the absolute sheer drama and emotion and power of these mountains. Only once before have I been sort of struck by a sort of sheer rock, which was in Yosemite, and looking at El Capitan. And this was this as good an experience. It was, it's just a mind-blowing place. It's every corner that you turn on these crazy windy roads, which I was driving again, it appears, was just, you want to stop the car and take a deep breath and make some imagery if you can. This particular thing, everything happened. There was an inversion, the sun came out, the storms came in, the sun went away, the storms got worse, but it was a genuine kind of emotional reaction. And I think every individual in the group felt exactly that. We were up high watching this happen. We had we'd commissioned someone you'd recommended to us, a guide who was giving us the history of the White War, which took place here. And so it was I've got goosebumps a little bit now, because it was quite an emotional period. We'd had this great guide with this amazing Italian voice, and I think he was a trained actor, so he made it even better with his storytelling. Then this happened, and then we turned around. In fact, there was some better stuff, or some equally good stuff going on behind us. And so we were taking more pictures, and it was just, the whole thing was much more emotional than it was about taking the pictures. Everyone got great pictures, and from what we've seen, the light was incredible. This is a absolutely sensational image, and I'm slightly jealous. I think I was busy teaching while Ed was doing this, but I'm kidding. I think we're all kind of mesmerized. So it's I'm not sure, Ed, if you agree with everything I've said, but I think it was a real kind of from the heart moment.
Yeah, I would totally. I mean, it was almost one of those moments where the camera is sort of incidental to the experience. I mean, I know we can all talk about how the camera connects you with the experience that you're having, and is a sort of conduit for that emotional exchange between you and the landscape. But actually, I'd have been quite happy just standing there, not making an image, and looking at this stuff with my jaw on the floor. But of course, being photographers and slightly obsessive like that, there was the need to press the shutter, and it was that just amazing moment of that piercing light that comes through these storm clouds. This is actually the clouds ringing the peak here in the distance is actually the inversion lifting, and then sort of underneath the inversion you got this burst of sunlight which illuminated this amazing rock formation called Cinque Torre. And as an element of scale, there's a tiny little refugio hut, sort of bottom right hand side of the frame, exactly there, and it gives you sort of an idea of the scale of the place. But it is, I mean, it's breathtaking. I mean, I know it's an overly used word, but it's a sensational environment, and almost sort of slightly overwhelming.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right, isn't it? I'm glad you mentioned, Tom, about the history as well, and that's something we wanted to, because when I did this a couple of years ago, it's something we wanted to get into that tour because I think when you start to piece together things that happened within the landscape and the background and the history, be that geographical history or geopolitical history, whatever it is, then you are then opening the door to those other feelings, which you can then start to make even more compelling imagery with. And I think with our trip there, I call it our because of Light and Land. You two obviously are doing it, but with our trip there as Light and Land, it is more about learning about the places as well, because that will actually positively impact the image making process, as opposed to just kind of seeing and looking. But I know a couple of these, obviously, in black and white that we started with here, square images as well. Ed, that was yours before. I don't have the preview in front of me, so is this another Ed or is this Tom? Is this you?
This is a Tom image.
Okay, so yeah, there's still, both of you use squares a reasonable amount from what I've seen in tonight's and some of your other work as well. So Tom, I'll ask you because this is one of yours. Do you commonly see in squares? Do you go around with that set in the camera at the time? If we can touch on a little bit of tech and vision from that point of view.
I do. I think I started, again, as an influence from Charlie. I started with the Hasselblad when I got to this college, when I started studying photography. And I was fortunate I could afford to get a Hasselblad and a couple of decent lenses. And ever since, I've seen, I often crop in square before I crop anything else. And I think it's a mistake sometimes, because you have your favored format, which doesn't make it the right one on a number of images. In my commercial work, I also do the same thing. I try and shoot in square, and a lot of clients don't like it. So I have to kind of force myself out of that. But I think for landscapes, because I see in square, it's very difficult to kind of come out of it. So I end up with that crop on my screen, and I tend to stick with it. I did talk to one of the last clients that we had about, not taking the picture when you get out of the car and looking around. And he had previous Flight and Land, the little frames cut out of small card, and he had the landscape one and a portrait one, and he said, and a panoramic one, and he said, "Well, we should really have a square one." And I had a square one because that's what I also have. So I think some people like the square as an option, whereas it's kind of my go-to on most things. On this particular image, the square seemed to work. I think there wasn't much of interest going on, particularly either side. And in fact, Ed and I had walked a good sort of hour to get to this location to see if it might be feasible to take clients there. And it actually wasn't. It was a bit too tricky from where we were staying. And there wasn't much to shoot. And then suddenly the weather, as we've discussed, everything started to happen. And then the storm came in. I think we both fired off a couple of shots, and then it moved on, and it was all a bit flat and grey again.
I think I'm going to keep us rolling just for time purposes, but I did want to point out with this trip as well, and maybe obviously you guys, now you've done it and you're doing it again, and the guys are going back there in June, that I wonder if sometimes people may fear that because it's in the mountains, there's a huge amount of hard work to be done in terms of walking, etc., etc. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe, yes, there is a little bit of walking to be done sometimes, a little bit of up and down, but it isn't a hugely demanding physically, is it, Ed, from the point of view of you're not going to get dragged up and down Dale to get to some of these places? No,
it's very true, Sam. I mean, going back to Tom's comment at the start, I mean, you can stop in any lay-by and there's an image to be made. I mean, it's that sort of place. But we've done quite a lot of research, and with your help and your guidance and experience, we've also been able to nail down a really fantastic itinerary where these kind of vistas that you're seeing here. This is one of my, I mean, it's not an amazing photograph, but it's sort of an 8-shot stitch panorama that kind of gives you a sense of the scale of some of these peaks. That's probably a 15-minute walk up from the roadside, and you're getting this incredible view of the Cellar Group, which is this amazing buttress, so very accessible locations. We're not kind of scaling vertical cliff faces or anything like that. It makes for a really fun trip, because you can pack a lot in. If you don't have to walk an hour and a half to and from each location, you can pack a lot in, and there's lots of variety to do, lots of different things we can work on: black and white, color, shape and form. And one of the interesting things, although this is a very wide shot, one of the interesting things that I found was how often I was using a long lens, to isolate shapes and forms. I think there may be an image or two later on which illustrates that. But I think one of the key aspects of the geology for me, and they're called the Pale Mountains for good reason. I mean, you could take a spot meter reading off an 18% grey piece of rock anywhere in the Dolomites and get your exposure nailed on. But what that means is that the rock faces reflect whatever the colour temperature of the light is that's on show. And so, this is obviously an evening shot, but they will reflect back at you the ambient color temperature, which is absolutely stunningly beautiful. This is another one of my pictures, but actually Tom spotted the potential from this location with the sort of twilight mauves and magentas, and the balance between the artificial light on the church and the remaining sort of blue hour ambient light on the mountain side there. So it's a really sensational place.
Yeah. I think, just to add, I think for guests, you're right, who think it's mountainous, it's going to be hard work. It was a gift. I mean, and you'd highlighted some of the spots for us, Sam. You literally can pull in, and there are shots to be shot. I mean, I did a trip to New Zealand years ago, and it was the same thing. It's designed for people to pull in and take pictures. So there isn't. I mean, my step count was at about 133 per day. I think it was. You barely do anything.
Your pass count was a bit higher though, Sam, wasn't
it? There were a couple where it was a bit higher, but it's a fantastic. It's designed for photographers or people who want to be photographers to go and see and be able to get fantastic images without having to really climb any mountains to get there.
Yeah, and I think they've got the very convenient certain lifts, and that's why we time it when we do, so you can actually access those, but still it's really quite quiet at that time of year compared to how it gets later on. You still get some interesting weather, as you guys will have had, and also there's not people everywhere, so it makes it really much more pleasant from a shooting experience. We were talking about the colors and how they reflect back from the rock. I think the other thing which I know we've talked about in the past is, and we're going to see a couple of images which maybe go back to the scale in a second, but just from the point of view of being able to shoot all day, even in June, there is stuff that you can do all day long, be that from the early morning light, you've got the meadows as well in the day, plus obviously as the weather comes through, and Ed, back to your point about the colors, those rocks will just give you back, won't they, whatever that ambient setting is.
Yeah, totally, Sam. I mean, this is a great illustration of the 2 points that we were talking about earlier: long lenses and the rock reflecting back the ambient color temperature. This is from the top of a mountain called Sacheda. We get a cable car up to the peak, and it's an amazing spot. But there's no jiggery pokery in Photoshop or Lightroom here. I mean, this was taken at, I think, probably noon, just before we sat down for lunch. So middle of the day, and you had obviously that kind of quite blue, cold light, and it was a little bit hazy in the distance. This rock pinnacle was probably 3 miles away from where we were stood. So it's a 400 or 500 millimeter focal length to bring that in, and I think it just illustrates another way of experiencing and photographing these mountains. You don't have to have these great wide vistas, which I think the temptation often when you rock up to somewhere like that is to stick the wide angle on, because there's so much excitement. You want to get it all in, and what that can often do with the perspective of those lenses is actually diminish the sort of grandeur of the mountains, because it pushes everything away with the perspective and makes them almost sort of dwarf-like in the frame. Whereas when you come in with a big, long focal length, you're actually getting that lovely kind of telephoto compression. And so that was the key to making this image, really. I wanted to sort of build up the contours and the layers of blue tones through that perspective compression, with obviously the strong sort of graphic element again, which is often the way in my images of that lovely kind of rock pinnacle and the counterbalance rock on the left hand side, which is then echoed in the peaks behind. But yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful place to shoot, right throughout the day, and you don't have to be confined to those small hours at the end, at the beginning and the end of every day. There's opportunities everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to talk about a couple of images now, which is another different way of dealing with those conditions, or even different lighting conditions. we're going to talk about a couple of IR images, infrared images. Brenda's asking what time of year. So Brenda, this is in June. Mid June is when the guys do the tour there. Really nice time of year to be out in the Dolomites area. And it goes without saying, you're going to eat well in this place. That's all. I'll just leave it at that. They all came back full. But we've got a couple of images here. I'm just going to toggle between the two because Ed, these are both IR images, aren't they? Obviously, we've got this. This is a bit Marmalada kind of vista, and then obviously we've got the church here. So generally, in terms of, let's talk a little bit of tech for a moment. In terms of IR shooting, is that something you do fairly regularly? Do you have a full setup for that you take with you, or what's the?
Yeah, I mean, I found myself experimenting with it a little bit over the last sort of 3 years, maybe. I had an old camera body converted to a full spectrum infrared camera, and you use little clip-in filters to then block different wavelengths or different elements of the spectrum. And it's just a really fun way of looking at things. I mean, you can get some really kind of very surreal and weird and wonderful effects. But actually, I quite like working with IR when you're just sort of slightly off piece. It's not obvious that it is infrared, but there's something about the image which is interesting and stimulates the senses a little bit. And I suppose with the images that you've put up there, Sam, and what I was trying to do, I mean, this is a nice composition anyway, I think, with the previous one with the little church and the two wonderful little shepherd's huts that are kind of overlooking the scene there. But it's a sort of playing with the idea of, is it snow or is it not? I mean, obviously we're at 3,000 meters. There's lots of snow about. Even actually at the time we go, there's a lot of snow around, and so that kind of element of playing with that idea was sort of the hook behind some of these images. I mean, the white foreground in that picture of Marmalada is actually green pasture, which is rendered as white because of the IR reflecting off brightly lit green foliage. I love the little road that's winding through the valley that you can see there. And Marmalada is just this incredible mountain. I think I'm right in saying it's the tallest mountain in the Dolomites, about 3,300 meters, and it's the only remaining glacier left in the Dolomites, which sadly itself is now only a fraction of the size of its size only 20 or 30 years ago, and is getting ever smaller. It'll disappear within 10 or 15 years, regrettably. But yeah, that's me playing with IR, and I bring my IR camera along, and the clients have actually had some fun experimenting with it and learning about it. It's one of the things we can bring to the party if there's any interest in looking at this. And obviously these are black and white conversions. There's an opportunity to work with color as well, which I've done in the past. So it's a fun angle to another lens in which you can render this amazing landscape.
Yeah, and it goes back to that point about that we started off with, isn't it, about interpretation. There's many different ways to do different things and see things differently as well, and that can give you some inspiration. Obviously, within the tour and within these locations, there's some really classic views and classic vistas. And obviously this is a very famous one some people may have seen before. Again, not a huge walk, don't worry. But it's amazing to have these kind of mind-blowing scenes in front of you. So Tom, I know you've traveled widely. I know this was kind of the early trip to the Dolomites, but it's fantastic that around, because it's basically the park is in different zones, isn't it? And each one has its own sort of character. So I know you've done some of that traveling now. What do you think about that in terms of each area offering something a little bit different?
Well, I think, to have that those options at your fingertips, and they're not huge drives to get, as you say, to sort of different zones of the Dolomites, is just one. I mean, this was an add-on at the end, because I can't quite remember, but we couldn't go to one particular place, so we had to just change our route a little bit, and we came through the most incredible hailstorm and grabbed a pizza because it made sense at the same time. Hailstorm finished, and we headed down here as the storm kind of drifted over. And I think I'm right in saying this is the most Ed, did you tell me it's the most Instagrammed location in Europe or something crazy like
It
that?
is, yeah. They've even built a platform on which we were standing to make these images, especially for photographers. So that gives you an idea of how popular it is. But having said that, Tom's done a lovely job here.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. It's the farmer, I think, had got annoyed with photographers marching across his land to get to the church. So he kindly built a platform, and then just the other side had put a number of rifles that would prevent us going beyond the platform. But next to us, there's about 25 photographers, waiting for the right light. That hailstorm had obviously caused, once it had passed, the air was, fresh and clean. The dust had gone. The grey clouds were just drifting away, and there was a bit of evening lights just in time. And it all happened fairly quickly. But again, that's the kind of drama and beauty and excitement of landscape photography in general. And I think the Dolomites in particular seems to provide all of it in these kind of fleeting moments. And if you're there, it's just quite heart-stopping. And this was another occasion. We had the hailstorm. That was fantastic. Pizza was nearly as good. And then we got here, lined up. And this is a pretty quick shot. I don't, there's some things I would probably have not included if I'd taken time, but we literally were firing off very quickly, knowing it was going to go. There were people having issues. There is a skill in placing your tripod on a very busy, small ledge where everyone's trying to get the best shot. There's some sharp elbows. I think there were a few words thrown from some other people in another group, not Light and Land people, of course, that would never happen. But we're Ed and I kind of trying to make sure everyone can get a shot, and it was kind of one of those moments again, a bit like the earlier black and white one. And I think the Dolomites just has this kind of thing where it all comes together, and it's one of those. There should be a sentence that Ed and I write which describes the Dolomites, which is one of those sort of photographic quote of the century, because I think the Dolomites brings everything together, and obviously wonderful driving by me.
Yeah. Of course, that's the running thing through all of this.
The main thing.
Yeah. So I think just to wrap up this little segment on the Dolomites, we've given it a good amount of time. A, because it's just a fantastic place.
Yeah.
B, I thought it was a nice way for Ed and Tom to kind of talk through some of their image making processes. And we're going to now head back to the UK in a minute in terms of the images, and we'll get some different techniques and different things we're going to talk about. But just to wrap this up, the guys are going in June 2024, so 13th to the 18th of June. Excellent time of year to go. It's fantastic places to stay. It's always immaculately clean, well looked after. You'll be really well taken care of. You'll eat well, and you'll see some amazing places like this. Plus, I know the guys have got 2 or 3 other places which are far less well known, but equally as beautiful, and you'll have those places all to yourself. So there's a real mix of the stuff you might have seen that entices you, but also the guys will show more of the Dolomites to you than you will have known about, and then a lot of other people know about as well because of all the background they've done as well. So if you do want to join them, get onto lightandland.co.uk. There's a few spaces available because that's fairly new going up. Just jump on that now, and you could be spending some time out there with them in the Dolomites. All right, chaps, let's change gear and let's head to the south coast, a little closer to home. Magnificent in a different way, perhaps. It is. No, it is. I wonder if there's probably people in the Dolomites think, I want to go on holiday to England, to the south coast of England. But photographically, an extremely giving area. We talked about that with the Dolomites. Let's talk now about the south coast. And Ed, I'm going to throw to you because you don't live a million miles from a lot of these locations. This is a tour that you guys do in March. So really beautiful time of year for light, I would imagine, down here. So maybe give us a little bit of background, Ed, just about this tour and some of the locations. I may toggle through a couple of images just for time reasons, but if you can give us that info.
Sure. Yeah, I've known this area for many, many years. I mean, I grew up in the southeast. This is the sort of closest bit of coast to where I've lived as a kid, and now living in southwest London. It's accessible, and so I often find myself wandering down here for a little bit of seascape action. But the thing about this area that we explore, it's probably slightly lesser well known. We do tend to do the bit between Rye on the Kent and East Sussex border through to Eastbourne and the Seven Sisters. This is actually the sort of the far western extremity of the area that we explore. And the White Cliffs here are the Seven Sisters, which run between Cuckmere Haven and Beachy Head and Eastbourne. But it's a really wonderful region to photographically, because there's so much diversity. So there's obviously some magnificent seascapes, and I was lucky here with the light. Again, it's one of my sort of signatures, I suppose. It's a sunrise, but not a kind of in your face kind of sunrise. It's nice warm light, but quite subdued and painterly. And I was fortunate on this occasion to get. I mean, the sunrise was disappointing in inverted commas, in that thick bank of cloud masks the real riot of colour that one often gets here. But there was enough of a sliver of a break in the cloud, which you can just see actually, to allow the sun to poke its nose through before being enveloped by the thicker band of cloud at the top of the image there, to give me some really lovely modelling light on the cliffs there. It's about a 10 or 12 second exposure, perhaps. Nothing too dramatic. I mean, I'm trying to avoid the ice rink kind of look and leave a bit of texture in the water. So we do, the opportunity of working here at Cuckmere and doing these lovely seascapes against the Seven Sisters and the White Cliffs are abundant, but there's also a whole host of other opportunities like this. This is one of Tom's, I think, at Camber Sands.
Yeah, it was. And actually, this was get out of the van and take a picture. There was no walking around. And it was, I think I shot this, it was maybe Paul Byrne, who I think I saw his name flash up, who was also working on this. This was another kind of quite incredible sunset where just everything came together. But it was an excellent example of how you say to people, you have your pre-tour briefing and you sit and you talk through what your plans are and what the things that you could look out for, some of the shots that are available, where we're going to go and so on. And then you get there and you park the car, and literally, I'm sure this happens on every tour, the scatter is quite incredible. There isn't a single person going in the same direction. It's as if you have to go and find your own spot, and from that spot you will look for what you want to photograph. And if you get lost or confused, you'll come and find us and then say, I don't know what I'm looking for, and then we'll kind of work on it. But it's quite incredible how everyone just goes different directions. Ed and I have a quick kind of, right, you go east, I'll go west, and just see what, make sure everyone's all right. And Paul, I think, was working on this, and I saw it as well with him, and we were sort of looking at this slightly unusual curve, not necessarily the most shapely of all curves, but it really kind of worked. And obviously with the light, it all came together. And again, I've gone square. I think most people who are doing something like this were not looking at square. But I think, this is another, it's a bit like the Dolomites in that you don't go very far and you're at yet another fantastic location. And there was some excellent feedback we got from one photographer who said, I normally come away with 2 or 3 pictures I'm really proud of, and I've got about 8 or 9 that would go straight on my wall if I could. So I think there was an issue with wall space probably, but it was one of those where you just thought, I don't disagree. If I haven't been back since we did this tour, but there's a dozen locations, just one after the other, as if it's been designed by a photographer. So I think I love this trip anyway. We got unbelievable light, and we got lovely locations, and a slightly overexcited group, because it just all seems to be coming together.
Well, that's what happens when it's all going off, isn't it? And
yeah.
Actually, Paul is with us, and he says, I did this trip with the dynamic duo earlier. Paul, that's an extremely polite way of describing them. I did this trip with the dynamic duo earlier this year. Highly recommended. 5-star workshop. Thank you, Paul. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Paul.
And hopefully you guys have seen tonight as well. Obviously, I'm having a bit of fun, teasing them, but these two you will have fun with. They will help you photographically, of course, but it's really important there's a good vibe in the group, and that people get to learn a bit more about you guys. Like we talked about, when you first meet, no one really knows anything about anyone, and by the end of it, a few days later, you all feel like you know a lot more about each other. And I know plenty of Light and Land people who've made friends, that they go and see they come on other Light and Land tours with, and then you have little groups where you catch up with each other and all the rest of it. So it is a sociable thing as much as it is, you know, and that can help relieve the pressure, can't it? Because as I sort of jump through a couple of these, there are times where people feel, like we've alluded to, they don't quite know what to shoot, or they've spent money, they're coming on a trip, you know, it has to happen, I have to get a great shot. But it's, you know, when you have that camaraderie, when you have that interest in what each other's doing, Ed, perhaps that's nice to just relieve that pressure, isn't it? So people can actually just start to experiment and play a bit with, you know, whilst they're out there.
Totally. And, you know, it's a non-judgmental, non-pressured environment. And, you know, everyone sparks off one another. And, you know, the wonderful thing about working in a group is we all learn from each other, and we all come away with new perspectives and you know, learning new techniques, and you know, whether it be technical or visual, you know, working off and sparking off other people is a big part of the enjoyment of working with like-minded photographers. This is Dungeness, by the way. This is one of the sort of key stops on the tour. So it's I don't know, people are probably familiar with it, but it's a wonderful place. It's a huge shingle peninsula. It's actually, I think, one of the biggest stretches of shingle in Europe. And there's all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff to photograph. So it's not just the sort of pretty white cliffs that we do. It's you know, rotting hulks of old fishing boats and fishing paraphernalia and rusting machinery and sort of graffitied walls. And there are obviously there's lovely kind of cottages and dwellings that are set back slightly off the beach, which you can shoot. Dungeness is a lovely, stimulating place to spend a morning or an afternoon, and well worth spending the time in. We actually, they're a little bit sensitive to big groups of photographers turning up because it's a private estate, but we've got a relationship with one of the wardens who will come up, will turn up and give us a briefing, and you know, almost sort of give us special permission to explore and work our magic at that particular location. It's a fantastic stop on the tour, that one. Nice. Obviously a bit of long exposure work which we can do and help people with if that's of interest.
Well,
I'll just quickly add about the Dungeness thing. Unlike the Dolomites, a lot of photographers that we've taken on tours have, you know, they love getting into the detail, and there were two people in particular who, when we arrived in Dungeness, this was it. You know, it was just everything laid on the plate for them, and they didn't always want to do the big beach vistas or the lovely curves in the sand or whatever. They just wanted to kind of really get close, virtually macro, and Dungeness has just a plethora of for the macro photographers. So I mean, there was some amazing images. Even the church that we saw a couple of pictures back, one of these ladies who liked the close-ups took a picture of the window of that church, which I think blew everyone's mind. It was the picture of the tour, probably, if I speak out of turn here a little bit. It's the other side of the church from here, but she just spotted the beautiful reflection of blue and gold off the slightly wonky church window. And it was just sensational. And, it's definitely one of those images that you don't forget, because none of us saw it. We all walked past that window dozens of times, but she was just clocked in to the detail. So I think this tour in particular offers that variety. It's not just like the Dolomites, which is much more, you can do close-up work, but you really got to work very hard for it. Whereas here you've got, it's there on a plate.
Yeah. And it feels like 7th to 10th, that's quite nice. It's just a few days, but you can kind of pack that in. If you when it's a bit longer, we always have to be careful as leaders just to pace it a little bit. Otherwise, by day 3 and 4, everyone's just completely knackered, and that can be difficult as well, because sometimes you feel like you can't see anything then photographically. But it sounds like you guys have got a really nice mix of different locations, and it's a short enough time that everyone, right, come on guys, we're here to do it. We can make sure you're in the right place at the right time. We'll take you to a broad variety of places. And obviously, when there's any coast, you can play with long exposures, like you've said. As the weather changes again on the coast, you can have powerful waves, less powerful waves, etc., etc. So I think that seems like a fair thing to say about that tour, is that it's all action. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. We work our guests pretty hard. We expect a lot of them. No, it's very relaxed. But the nice thing about the the time of year that we go is that sunset and sunrise are at reasonable times. There's plenty of opportunities in the evening to all sit down and have a glass of wine and look at some images and discuss those. But also importantly, early in the year, late autumn, early winter, the sun rises and sets at nice angles to the coast. It's sort of setting and rising almost out at sea on both occasions. So the time of year has been carefully chosen to maximize those sorts of opportunities.
Yeah. Sue has mentioned she's looking forward to this in March 2024. That's fab, Sue, if you're going to be joining the guys.
As are we.
The dynamic duo, as I should call them. And Jen commented, these images are great in their apparent simplicity. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I hope everyone's kind of seen that between the two chaps tonight. There's such strong design, I would say, across their imagery. And I think that's something that helps when you kind of get a feel for that design in terms of putting shapes together, using light in the best way. That really starts to elevate photography from being location-based to actually being, it gives you the tools to become, to communicate, should we say, with the photography, to pass over emotion and all the other things as well. And this is a great example of that. There's a very... Charlie has an image from here, doesn't he? Which is
he does, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Unashamedly copied here.
No.
It's very different, very different lighting conditions, and actually a slightly different perspective. Bill Brandt. I first came across this image. Right. Bill Brandt shot it, probably in the '60s. Not an image I'm particularly fond of. I mean, Charlie's rendering of this was absolutely lovely. But this is I suppose an example of one of the comments that came up, apparent simplicity. I mean, it took me about 10 years to make this photograph. And I've got an archive catalogue of failure stored somewhere in the house of sheets of transparencies, 6x17s and 6x6s. I've never got the light, never got the composition right. And partly it's because when you shoot this particular composition, we go to this location if the time and the light is right. You've got about a half an hour window because you're actually photographing almost into the sunset, and so you need to have the sun setting off to the right hand side of your frame, because otherwise you're shooting straight into it and everything blows out. It's contrasty and horrible. But you need the sun to still be around and not have dropped too far beyond the far ridgeline. So there's about a 30-minute window, which is kind of what I worked out after going and standing on this spot a dozen or more times. And eventually this is the end of a storm blowing through and flooding the valley with light. This is the Cutmere Valley. It's a beautiful river that ends up in the Cutmere estuary. And the river just lit up with this beautiful reflected light, and everything else dropped into shadow, deliberately underexposed to emphasize the graphic form and the shape in the foreground. So that's where it all worked and came together in the end. And this is one of the locations that's on our agenda. We took the guys there last time we did the tour, and everyone really enjoyed. There's lots of things you can work on here. If you take a few steps to the left hand side, you get much more of a U shape rather than the S shape. Where the river enters and exits the frame is important. So there's lots of stuff to work on here compositionally, even though, optically, when you look at this, you say, well, that's just quite a simple graphic image. There's plenty to work with here, and it's really good fun. It's a lovely location.
Yeah, it is. Sam, there's something that you touched on, and I think it's really important that people, what Ed and I try and do is that we take you to these locations, and obviously you can scatter and go to any view you want. There are images that we have in mind that we know work as images, which we tell people about. There's no secrets, and we suggest ways of doing it, and then people interpret that scene in their own way. But the important thing is the light, and it's we can take you to these wonderful locations. If the light's not good, the location is not going to be a great image. But waiting for that light, or preempting what's going to happen to the light so that you're ready to get the image when the light is right, is one of the things that we try and discuss and work on. Because Ed didn't just get here just as it all lit up. He was there ready, waiting. He'd been there plenty of times before, so he was kind of warmed up and knew what to do. But even so, the light doesn't always work for you, and if it does work, it might just last for 2 or 3 seconds. You've got to be ready to take it, and you need to know what you wanted to see when that light does work. And so that's one of the kind of key things that we kind of keep drilling in about, just keeping your eye open to what's happening so that you can make sure you get that picture that works for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And all those, the efforts we don't see, it's the back catalogue, isn't it, as we all know about.
Yeah.
So listen, guys, we are approaching the end, but if you're happy to give me another 5-10 minutes at the most, well, let's just get into the last few images, because we've been talking about this trip. This is 7th to the 10th of March, South Coast, dawn till dusk, as we said. There's a great number of locations and things to see. There's just a couple of spaces left on that trip. If you're interested, go and have a look, and go and look at the feedback the guys got, because that's on the listing. They got amazing feedback from the guests last time on this trip. So do go and have a look at that, and you'll get a feel for the fact this is an excellent value trip, and you're going to get a great deal of help and input from the gentleman with us. We're going to just spend in the last 5-10 minutes. Thank you everyone for hanging on. I can see a good number of you staying with us. That's great. We're just going to do 5 or 10 minutes max. Otherwise, I've got to pay them both more. And we're gonna more than zero. No, we're going to talk about Suffolk tour that the chaps do 10th to 12th of November. Now, this one is fully booked, so we're not going to linger on this. Not just because it's fully booked, but also because we're up on time. But there will be another one of these trips, I believe, coming in 2024. And it's based down in Suffolk, isn't it, Ed? So can you tell us, just as I flick through a couple of these images, Ed, perhaps, what was the kind of, again, what was the inspiration behind doing the tour here and at this time of year in particular, and the types of locations?
Yeah, I mean, again, Sam, I think it's a function of, the real diversity of shooting opportunities, photographic opportunities, around these shores. I mean, it's a beautiful area, very unspoiled. So, I don't think anyone would fail to be motivated and stimulated by the locations that we go to. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people know this corner of the country well, but most of the trunk roads and the sort of main roads have been pushed inland because, close to the coast, it's quite marshy and underdeveloped, and so there's a lot of variety, both sort of tranquil and, as Tom's image here shows, very active and industrial. And we have the opportunity to make pictures of man-made structures like the jetty, or the sea defences. That was my image in the previous picture, and as well as this is Felixstowe docks, which we go to. There's always some sort of amazing kind of cargo ships that you can shoot at twilight. But then there's the Sizewell. I mean, come to East Anglia and visit a nuclear power station. Doesn't sound the most attractive proposition, but actually, I mean, it's a really superb location. There's these amazing kind of cooling platforms that are out in the surf, which you can work with long exposures and explore the sort of shapes of the dome of the power station. And then there's this. I mean, this is an amazing location. People, I'm sure, will recognise it. It's becoming ever more popular. Actually, when I first started going here, you wouldn't see a soul around, and now a lot of it's becoming more popular with photographers. This is Shingle Street, another great big bank of shingle. And it's slightly terrifying to take people here, because you never quite know how the shingle banks are going to line up. They're ever changing, and so heaven forbid we arrive and these sort of pools have evaporated or whatever. I mean, it never happens. But this was actually on the tour. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Paul.
£10 in the post. Yeah.
And again, this appealed to me, from its sort of graphic simplicity. We had an amazing sky. This wasn't a dawn shot. I think we were there, I don't know, Tom, what was it, probably 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, and the sky was just had these amazing textures in it. And this is one of the pools that gets of seawater that gets trapped by the ever changing banks of shingle, and the little Coast Guard cottages as the motif in the background just sat really well. On the third line, and I think we both shot this picture. As I think we didn't make many images because we were concentrating on making sure everyone else was happy. But we both kind of immediately, the antenna went up, and we both saw this and made a picture here. And I think in black and white it renders really well because of its simplicity, but also because of the range of luminance. The luminosity and the range of tones in the image is what makes it work.
Yeah, and
it's really quite an incredible location. That particular shingle street is I before I'd been there, when the first time I went there, it's rolling hills of shingle. It's quite incredible. And it goes, it's that's probably the most exhausting place we go to, because walking 10 yards in that stuff knackers you out. So quite good to get out from the car and shoot from there on this occasion. But and amazing that this is not a huge, the camera is, it allows you to believe here, but that is not a huge lake or anything. It's a fairly small, manageable pond in the shingle, but it's just, everything around there is slightly misleading, particularly these huge kind of mounds of shingle. And then the other side of the shingle to the right, you've got the sea, which is also doing, moving in amazing patterns around the shingle. So this is one where people really do scatter and can find all sorts of things to shoot. This particular place, if the water's there, is the first stop before then exploring further.
Amazing sky as well. And like you mentioned there, Tom, just that perspective, if you do have those pools of water to play with, how you position yourself. And as you alluded to, Ed, with the winding river, just a few inches up, a few inches down, a foot to the left, a foot to the right, those relationships can completely change, can't they, between all the elements?
Totally right. And had to work pretty hard. This is shot actually unusually for me with a very wide angle lens. I think it's probably a 17mm or something, in order to try and get that whole shape in. It's actually a slight optical illusion, because I've used the shadow of the shingle bank on the sort of right hand side of the image to kind of finish the water off, if you like, the sort of the luminosity of the water. Actually, the pool extends out the right hand side of the frame, but I was able to use the shadow just to hold that bright patch of water in the corner. And you're right. I mean, just it's a really lovely place to work with people, because you're spot on. I mean, tiny little changes in angle or elevation, or a step to the right or step to the left can dramatically change the look and the feel of the image, and how all the relationships work in a photograph, and how the graphic elements sit and work off and spark off each other. And so deceptively simple, but actually some really fun stuff to work with there.
Yeah, cool. We haven't even really gone heavily into black and white and some thoughts about it behind it. I was probably a little ambitious today, so apologies with what I thought we might get through. So it might be something we can drag Ed and Tom back on to talk to us, maybe not even location based. We could just do a bit of a breakdown and talk more photography with everyone, because I think everyone would enjoy that. Just as we sort of come to a finish then, this is the last image we're going to share with you. Again, it touches on a lot of things we've discussed in terms of the graphical elements, the strong design, and obviously when you're met with beautiful hues and colours, that's what you should kind of work with in a way, and if it's there to be had, then to enjoy it. So just as we wrap up, I will point out again, this is a trip which unfortunately this year is fully booked. There are no spaces available. However, the guys are going to be putting this on again. Will we be thinking the same time next year, chaps? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I think so, Sam. Yeah, it's a great time of year to go. It's quiet. You often have these locations to yourself. The low sun means there are opportunities throughout the day that we can explore, both coastal and inland, and so it's a really nice time. You get those lovely kind of obviously it's autumn, so there's the opportunity to go and shoot some ancient oak woodland as well if the weather really deteriorates badly. It's a lovely time of year to go. We'll be trying to put it on and get it up on the website ASAP for next year. And there's one or two other trips that we're currently working on and exploring to other locations, which hopefully will be interesting for people to come along and watch this space.
Cool. Well, lightandland.co.uk, you can find all the stuff. If you go to the tutors page, you can find Ed or Tom. Click on them and it'll show you exactly the tours they have coming up. And if you stay subscribed to the newsletter, that's where we release the tours first. And obviously a lot of the things, especially in the UK, are very popular. They do go fairly quickly. So if you make sure you signed up to that, you'll get first dibs on those tours. I'm going to just briefly remove that and pick up a couple of the comments that have come in whilst we've been on here. So where are we? Here we go. Too many things going on at once. Brenda, many thanks to you all. She's really enjoyed it. Thank you, Brenda, for watching.
Brenda.
Really appreciate that. David mentioned that he was delighted to see new images of Dolomites, most beautiful place he's visited, where the weather changes every half an hour. Yeah, it's sort of, yes,
it does.
It does.
Yeah.
But anyway, you can have a pizza in a hailstorm. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, is there?
Yeah.
And Astrid's enjoyed. Thank you, Astrid. We'll have Astrid back on soon as well, hopefully, as a special guest on my news show. Talking of that, that is the next trip, the next live stream, excuse me, is going to be myself on the 9th of October. That is going to be one of the monthly news shows where we talk about the latest camera related gear, equipment releases, any new exhibitions, any new books. I'll do my book of the month, and I'll also be having Charlie Waite do a image review. He's going to talk through one of the images from the Light and Land leaders. So that is a mini show. That's about half an hour usually, and you'll find me on that on Monday the 9th. That's a Monday, everyone, not a Tuesday. Monday the 9th of October. But for today, gentlemen, I would just like to say thank you so much for all your time. I do enjoy having a little bit of banter with you. It's great fun. And so, Tom, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me, Sam. It's been a real pleasure.
You're welcome. And Ed, of course, thank you, sir, for coming along.
Ditto. Thanks a lot, Sam. Great to interact with everybody, and thanks everyone for watching.
Yeah.
Stay tuned, guys, for all the upcoming stuff that Ed and Tom have got going on with Light and Land. We will be doing more and more with them, and they will be doing more and more with you out and about in the field. Thank you for everyone that's leaving the wonderful comments. That's great. If you can do me one final favor before you go, make sure you hit that thumbs up or the like button, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook. That is really appreciated. But for now, I will shut up, let everybody go. Have a fantastic evening, and I'll see you again in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks, guys, and thank you for watching. Goodbye.